Hi, everybody, and welcome to the live interview with our main guest artist of the year, Dušan Bogdanovic. It's a pleasure to have him again. It's a pity not to be together live in Volterra, but welcome, Dušan, to this little interview
Thank you, Luca. Thank you, Maarten.
to chat a bit about some topics that were quite attractive for students of the last year, and I think that will kind of be interesting for any other guitarist and composer interested in Dusan career and aesthetic in general. We prepared a set of topic, let's say, and the first question that actually is quite spontaneously that pops up quite spontaneously for everybody who talks with him is that we know that Dusan is a guitarist, a composer, in a long tradition of guitarists slash composers, let's say, writing for their own instrument. And a question to start would be, in how far are the guitarist and the composer two distinct facets of your artistry? Or, if better, you do consider them a continuum of the same expression?
Well, that's certainly a very good question. I mean, actually, I continue them more. I consider them more as sort of a continuum. It is more of a continuum. So I don't necessarily separate so much the guitarists from composers, and it just happens that historically there has been more and more division between instrumentalists and composers. But as we all know, originally, lots of composers, lute players, let's say Francesco Canova da Milano or John Dowland, they had this very much kind of like a collaboration between the two, not to mention great masters like Bach or Mozart. I mean, also in other kinds of music like jazz or different kinds of ethnic music, the connection between the composition and the instrument is much stronger. However, I see these days, I think that there's more and more connection between composition and instrument in the classical music and in the classical guitar in particular. Of course, there is some level of specialization. So, given that we can only focus so much being one person at a time, we are kind of like forced to focus more on one thing than on the other. So when I was younger, I studied both composition and the guitar. And in the beginning, I was more focused on instrument. I was more focused on being a guitarist. And then little by little, I opened that up. I started improvising. I played jazz, etc. And then later on, I kind of established myself more as a composer guitarist. At this point, I think I'm perhaps more of a composer than guitarist, but I still love my instrument. I play concerts, etc.
Yeah, indeed. The interesting thing is that today there's, as you said, a growing interest of young players in both, let's say, getting hyper specialized in their instrument, and at the same time trying to create a parallel. I don't want to say career, but at least a parallel, let's say, studies in composition. And it's kind of, yes, as you said, this disruption to me was very clear when I read for the first time your bios, in which it was quite clear that you were kind of raising talent as a performer, and then you just said, okay, it's fine, but I'm more interested into composition. And then the two things kind of blend together, and probably they've always been since your first attempt on playing, composing, or improvising, as you would say. But we will go back to improvisation because this is a very interesting aspect. And the second question, which is strictly related to the first one, is that you also said a guitarist composer, but actually you do compose for many other instruments, and I know that often in your classes there are even pianists or harpists or other musicians, kind of other instrumentalists following your composition lesson. So what specific qualities do you think a guitarist composer can bring into composition for other instruments than guitar? And if your ideas for pieces even dedicated to other instruments, both on the guitar or on the piano or another instrument?
That's a good question because, I mean, I'm a pianist just to the extent that I can work a little bit on, instrumentation and things like that, but I mean, obviously I can't play much of the piano repertoire. On the other hand, as a composer, you're always faced with the structure. You're always faced with faced with instrumentation. You're always faced with things that are not necessarily just focused on the guitar.
Yeah.
So really, when you are teaching composition to other instrumentalists, such as pianists, I mean, you're more focusing on the composition than necessarily the instrument.
Yeah,
I had for example, for the past 2 years, I had a Russian pianist, Artem Pervushin, who is really an excellent pianist, great improviser, and also very good composer. So we worked more on his techniques of improvising, on what kind of rhythmic sort of structures he wants to use in his music. And I was mainly his organizer, so to say. I was kind of like a manager in a way, I was trying to kind of manage a bit what he's doing. So in that way, I think I'm not sure that my knowledge of the guitar is necessarily all that important. On the other hand, that class is a composer-performer class. So as a composer-performer, I had some influence in how he developed himself as a composer-performer. That is to say, I wasn't just a composer in a sort of an abstract way. So I had a lot of connection with him as a performer, so that we could organize the way he would structure his concerts, the way he would improvise, etc. It could be anybody else, perhaps any other performer that in that way could influence his performing abilities. However, guitar and piano are very close. So there is that kind of advantage of having some sort of a connection because of the capacity to do counterpoint and harmony, etc. If I was, say, now I'm just going sort of like a bit further into this, say, if I was a composer, performer, violinist, a violin player, I'm not sure that I would have as much to say about that. Perhaps just as a performer, the psychological aspects and some other aspects of performance. But I think as a guitarist, there was more of a connection with that.
Okay.
I envision this class, which, I'm retiring this year. So that's just, unfortunately, unfortunately, because I don't really feel like I'm retiring. But okay, this is officially I'm retiring. But I think that I can envision this class, performer composer program, as a program that can really be focused on a lot of different instruments. And there are some places, like say there is CalArts in California Institute of the Arts, that has this program developed, but developed in a way with a lot of diversity, where there are various performers, different instrumentalists that are doing their compositions. So I think that that's something where I see really a great future. Personally, I do. One thing, maybe just to kind of also, just to say this, I mean, I don't think that there is any kind of absolute future or absolute direction. What I think is that, just everybody has their own kind of slant, their own focus, their own direction of what, according to their psychological profile, according to their intellectual preferences, what winds up being their path, so to say. So in that sense, I mean, I don't think there's anything, how shall I say, there's nothing absolute about being a composer-performer. I think some people have no interest in composition, and that's completely legitimate. It's as legitimate as composers they don't want to perform. So I think it just all depends on what kind of path you find really natural for yourself. And I think that why I was very keen on doing this is just because this is not something that is very much established at this point. If you want to be a composer, there are millions of places where you can go. If you want to be a performer, there are millions of places you can go to. If you want to be a performer composer, it's very limited.
Yes, indeed.
So I think that that's why I think personally, I think this is something very interesting. And on the other hand, certain kinds of music, now I'm just sort of going in my themes.
Yes, great.
Okay, what I'm thinking about is, for example, as I mentioned before, being performer composer was not only a possibility, but it was actually an expected role at certain point.
Yeah.
Say in the Renaissance, in the Baroque time, being a performer composer, being an improviser, everybody was improvising to some extent. I'm not saying completely, but how many people do you see today playing, say, Bach, preludes or fugues or anything like that, and improvising? Not that many. Maybe in specialized early music circles now, this is becoming more and more common. But in general, you're just supposed to come and you play this monumental music by Bach, and it's all kind of supposed to be 100% exact and magnificent and great, etc. But that music actually intrinsically it has possibility of being improvised, if nothing else, ornaments, let's say. But even that's kind of very sort of timid, just doing ornaments. But doing like variations, themes and variations, improvising forms as they do, as the organists, for example, do. I think that's all very important. And I wanted to mention that one of my students, Bor Zuljan, who is a lute player, when we studied, I worked on guitar primarily with him, but we did one research project on improvising Ricercars, improvising Fantasia or Ricercar form.
Nice.
And so we spent 2 years working together, and he established ways, tactics, how to improvise Ricercars, and actually that's what he does these days. He did a CD recently of Dowland, and some of the forms are written out forms, some are interludes that are completely improvised. So I think, in my opinion, I think this is all very healthy. Again, I'm not saying that everybody should be doing it, but I think it's a nice stretch of imagination and work.
So your statement is actually not only personal and concerning yourself, but also teaching and pedagogy in general. Yes.
Yes. I try to make all the everything that I'm theoretically thinking, I'm trying to make it practically existent. Because otherwise, I think it just all stays in some realm of books and is just hiding somewhere and collecting dust, So I think we have to make it live in a way. That's what I think.
Yes, indeed. But since you're talking about that, we can also go to the question concerning the fact that over the years you built your very personal style and quite immediately identifiable language. So yeah, no, we all know that it's like that. And what would you recommend then to a young guitarist who want to kind of develop his own language, using the tools coming from the tradition, but going, let's say, deep into what can be also personal and individual? For example, I remember that in the symposium that we had a couple of years ago in the Koninklijk Conservatorium in Brussels, and I think you were invited, but it was not the round table you were at. We had Elliot Fisk, Stephen Goss, Boris Gaker, who is a local player, and they kind of insisted, for example, on the fact that, and I don't know if you agree with that, not insisted, but they declared that harmony is there. I mean, is there in our Western tradition, and it's been used overall from Bach until, but even from before, from the Renaissance until the last century, and melodies are always there in our system. With the you can, I mean, the exploitation of the modes and of the scales is has been done for so long that the only element of the music in which you can still find new things different from your tradition and interesting for your development, it's rhythm. And it's something that I find very connected to the fact that, I mean, if you just think of the polyrhythmic studies, for example, or of the fact that you introduce for Western players all the your own tradition, Serbian, so Yugoslavia, Serbia, and polyrhythmics, and which is part actually of your compositional and aesthetic theory. So if you think that rhythm can be something to dig deep into, and if according to the world music in general or to different music tradition can also be like an interesting thing to explore for a young student who is, let's say, at the end of his master career. So yeah, he has approached from Bach to Da Milano to Sor and Rinastera. Voila.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the question is, who are we talking about? Are you talking about the composer guitarists, or you're talking about performers more, or improvisers? Who are you talking about?
I think that we stay in this new category that you defined, let's say. So the guitarist performer,
okay,
composer performer.
Right, right. Well, I think these are interesting times. These are very interesting times. Of course, I think it's important to study the harmony, and actually, apropos this subject, you know, I'm just having this harmony that I wrote many years ago, maybe 7 years ago. I wrote the harmony for classical guitar, and so now I'm just getting a really good Italian publisher, Curci, and they're publishing this harmony. It should be coming out in the autumn. So I think it's very important, of course. Harmony is very important, and even this harmony that I did is very limited. It really kind of stops around Debussy and Ravel. So that's as far as I could go, and it was a lot of work. It's a tremendous amount of work. So I think that all that kind of stuff, you can actually go into any subject like this and go very much in depth and in detail. So we can talk about the rhythm in particular, but I think any of these aspects, like melodic, harmonic, contrapuntal, formal, just the form, just the structuring of the music, and the rhythmic, I mean, these are like tremendous subjects. These are kind of like subjects we can talk about and go into depth forever, you know.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, to connect to me, yes, the rhythm has been very important to me. So maybe we can just talk about the rhythm in particular, but I do think that all these other subjects are incredibly important anyway. Like say, you know, you talk about harmony, I mean, you can go in harmony as far as, you know, the area where the extended tonality touches atonal music. So this whole area, this is like a huge area, not to mention like the modal thinking or the polymodality. pentatonic and various other kind of, I mean, harmony is just like an inexhaustible source. But okay, let's just kind of stop and go back to the rhythm. So
no, for me you can go on. There's no
right.
problem at all, because
you're right.
some questions are,
Yeah.
are asked just to be against them. I mean, to have another view. So
It's also
right.
fascinating that maybe, is that different for guitar players, you think, Dušan? And for our repertoire, that certain harmonic idioms have been discovered less? Or is it just because it's true that, I mean, we have seen a lot of evolutions in all directions in harmony, but historically it's also true that it's not always followed just as fast in our instrument, because, I mean, many things seem to come just a little bit after the mainstream introduction of certain phenomena as well.
Mhm.
You meant in general, you mean for all musicians at this point, this kind of in-depth study is still, and then the putting into practice. Yeah, okay.
You're right. I meant it kind of very generalized. But if we're talking just about guitar, yes, I think guitar is a bit kind of behind the fact. We're a little bit slow. However, in certain areas, we're much faster than other classical areas. So, for example, joining jazz, rock, improvisation, etc., we are much more advanced, you could say advanced, than the other instruments, especially instruments that are kind of very much connected to the classical tradition. So yes, I mean, in guitar repertoire, there is, talking just of harmony, there is a huge variety of, from modal thinking, again, I'm coming back to Canova da Milano, one of my favorite composers. So Canova da Milano to Bach, and further on, soar to, say, romantic harmony of, I don't know, there are so many great sort of harmonic composers that use harmony really well. So I think there is a lot to learn about harmony. And then there is kind of more contemporary harmony, like you mentioned the Walton before, say like Walton, or even like more modern composers that are not harmonically defined the same, like say Elliott Carter with changes. So there's a huge amount of things to talk about. But perhaps we should come back to the rhythm, because I think that's where we started. So my interest in rhythm has been, maybe to some extent, I've had a lot of interest in rhythm because I do come from that area, from the Balkan area, where the asymmetric meters, the odd meter, is very common. So that's already something that's kind of a bit strange, quote unquote, strange for the Western ears. And so I remember, like, some of the earlier compositions that I did were in odd meter. Like one piece I wrote for piano, actually, I remember now, it was like in 5/8. So that was in 5/8. So I used these, the odd meter very much. And then little by little, I got interested in other sort of rhythmic music. So from jazz, my interest in jazz, I went into interest in African music. So in African music, rhythm is just absolutely important and magnificent. So anyway, actually my interest in polyrhythm was more connected with African music than it was necessarily with the Balkan music. There aren't really, I mean, at least to my knowledge, there's not that much polyrhythm in Balkan music. There's much more polyrhythmic thinking in African music, or say some other Middle Eastern areas. So my interest in polyrhythm comes more from African music. Then I started developing this series of polymetric or polyrhythmic exercises, and this was something that was just an interest of my own. I just found it fascinating to be able to subdivide in different ways the same kind of patterns. So say, 1 meter that is very typical for the Balkans is 9, which consists of 2, 2, 2, 3. So taka 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 taka. Another pattern of the 9, which is regular, is 3-3-3. So that's 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1. So there is a different subdivision. So you can have pam pam pam, takata 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 tam tam tam, takata 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2-3. If you put these two together, then you get like a very interesting polyrhythmic or polymetric pattern. So I've been very much interested in these kinds of things, and much of my music is rhythmically based on these sort of patterns. For example, there's my Sevdalinka, which is written for 2 guitars and a string quartet. And this one is based on 15. So, for example, this one has like a 3x5 and 5x3. So it's kind of like mathematically, it seems very sort of abstract, but not really, you know. So, for example, this is 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3, right? Yeah. Or 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Yeah. So it's again these kind of subdivisions, and I find those kind of very natural. Actually, I find these things very natural and not very abstract. But yeah, that has been my great interest. And then eventually I discovered that Ligeti has written this great rhythmic studies, not just the studies for piano. And I discovered that, you know, I mean, he's done like incredible. This is an incredible rhythmic and compositional feat. But I was actually surprised because I didn't know about this sort of that anybody else was doing this. So, you know. Yeah. Anyway, it was just kind of, it's just very interesting, you know, that at the same time, you find lots of things, sometimes things that you're interested, suddenly you discover that there are many other things that's been going on that are kind of going along the similar lines. And also polyrhythm, polymeter has been a lot used in jazz, in improvised music. And actually, I was just looking a little bit earlier this morning about the metric modulation, which is a fact of taking the same sort of a pattern and just giving it a different metric profile, so to say. Mm. And I just noticed that there was, in this evolution of the metric modulation, there was, for example, one piece by Miles Davis called Footprints, which already has been using this kind of pattern. So it's fascinating. These kinds of subjects are completely fascinating. You can spend your whole life just just focusing on one area, just going into details of any one of these areas. How's that?
Yeah, that's great. I was just thinking of Footprint and Ligeti that you mentioned, and actually the thing of it's just music is enjoyable music. I mean, it's not music that you have to be there and follow, and even there are unexpected aspects or rhythmic modulation. It just feels natural and
well, I think it's kind of most of these things that I've been interested in are not really theoretical. What I mean is, yes, they're theoretical to some extent, but I have a real fondness. I mean, I really like, for example, these polyrhythmic patterns. Yeah. I find them very exciting because they're intellectually and physically and emotionally very stimulating. It's very interesting stuff. Yeah. And when I studied composition, I was much more involved with so-called avant-garde music at that point. And I was sort of writing serial music, and then I went away from that, and I sort of went in this direction of coming back to sort of to ethnic or folk music, to the world folklore in a way, and I had this interest in African music, and back in Balkan music, Indian music. So I found that actually extremely interesting, and also how shall I say, much more integrated with the human as we are. It's not just intellectual, it's not just physical or just emotional. It actually integrates the human on all the levels. And that's what I see as something that I'm interested in primarily. That's why I think these things, if you take them out of context, say polyrhythms, then they seem very kind of abstract and dry. But if it's in the right context, you know, it's emotionally very satisfying. It's very interesting. It's rhythmically very exciting, and I think that's how I would look at all this stuff.
And then coming back to your process beyond the performer composer, it's actually interesting. So something attires your attention, and we were also wondering, Luca and I, when we prepared these questions. How does your work end up on the paper in the end? Is it something that you are on your lap with the guitar and experimenting with for instance, a polymetrically idea in which then a melody appears? Or we were very interested to see in which order these things come. Or do you sit down at the table and write from your mind, from your imagination, and then see what is possible on an instrument?
Mm-hmm. Well, when I was younger, I used to play everything on guitar. I played everything. I composed on the guitar, and but then little by little, I found that it's kind of problematic if you always compose with the guitar, because you wind up doing lots of cliches. You know, you're always doing what's under your fingers, and then sometimes the composition suffers, so to say. You know. So these days, I kind of more, I just more use piano. Actually, piano seems to be more my instrument of choice, you know. I use piano, but then I always check with the guitar just to make sure if I'm writing for guitar, because sometimes I write things that are really kind of very difficult, and then I myself have really trouble playing it, you know. So I'm usually thinking, if I have trouble playing it, then you know, I probably should do something easier.
It's a relief to hear you have trouble as well. I think many will be happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, trouble with my composition. I have probably more trouble than with lots of other stuff. So I think that one great thing about being composer-performer is that you are always in contact with the instrument. So even if I write it on, say, on piano, I still, you know, I know what the instrument is like. I always check with the instrument. So it's never really, again, to say it's never really something purely theoretical or abstract. I think it's very important to be kind of, to live with this music and to live with the instrument, to live with the sounds. You know, if you're writing for flute or you're writing for cello. I mean, I bought a violin, you know, at some point because I just wanted to kind of really, just to see how my father played violin, so I have some idea of it, but nevertheless, you know. Then for the cello, I didn't buy a cello, but I would tune the guitar as a violoncello, you know, C, G, D, A, like an octave, well, actually an octave lower. So anyway, these were, you know, so that's how I feel that I stay in the contact with the instruments themselves. As far as writing, you know, that's sort of a different question. Like I said, I do use piano quite a lot, and this is because piano is easier. I mean, it's kind of strange to say, but piano is a lot easier than guitar. Guitar is a very, very difficult instrument. And that's why, you know, the composers have really traditionally sort of avoided guitar, you know. I remember that David Tannenbaum told me that he was hassling Ligeti. He was running after him. Well, maybe he wasn't running after him, but he really wanted Ligeti to write for guitar. And Ligeti said, no, I can't do that. It's just such a difficult instrument to write for, you know. And then, of course, we know that famous story about Julian Bream and Stravinsky. And so it is a very idiosyncratic instrument. It's a very, very difficult instrument to write for. And I actually come across this all the time. I've been just writing recently a piece for a really great guitarist, a friend of mine, Mike Kudirka, who can play like almost anything. And anyway, I wrote these 2 blues meditations, and they're like 3 voice contrapuntal pieces. And if I wrote this for piano, or let's say for 3 different instruments, I would have written it like, you know, like not in 5 minutes, but extremely quickly. Writing it for guitar took me forever, because not only do you have to have the lines kind of go according to their logic and according to your intuitive feeling, you know, because you have to follow your intuition. But at the same time, it has to follow this unfortunate kind of limitations of registers in the guitar. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you are having, I don't know, if you're having some higher line in higher register, I mean, you know, you just cannot have independent line in the bass. It's just impossible. It's very difficult to do it, because then you have to stretch your fingers. Like, say, you're doing a line up here, and then you need a bass, E, F, G, or something. It's impossible to do. I mean, as we know this from transcribing Bach or other things. But that is really tough. It's very tough. Guitar is a very tough instrument to write for. On the other hand, there are beautiful things on guitar that is just like irreplaceable. You know, it's like this miniature kind of piano, you know, that you can vibrate. You can have this campanella, these beautiful campanella sounds. There are lots of things that are so fantastic about guitar that you know, you cannot replace it by any other instrument.
Yeah.
So as usual, you know, there's a plus and there's a minus.
A minus, yeah.
So, but I do think that if you kind of just go with cliches on the guitar, it sort of winds up like a cliche also. You know, what I mean is there's so much guitar music that's based on arpeggio, for example. It's like unavoidable. You know, you have just these millions of tunes and compositions, and they're all arpeggios, you know. So that's kind of like really unfortunate, you know, in a way, because I think for me, to come back to the rhythm, as important as rhythm is counterpoint. Counterpoint is incredibly important, because it gives you like independence of lines, and every line is sort of like self-conscious, so to say. I mean, for me, that's how I write. So every line has its own logic and has to go where it wants to go naturally, and at the same time you have the vertical you know, coinciding of the lines, etc. So I think counterpoint is really, really very important. So I would say, I mean, sure, you know, I mean, it's okay, you know, like everybody has to start somewhere. I mean, so yeah, start with arpeggios, play the chords, you know, melody with chords, etc. But at some point, I would advise every would-be composer performer to study counterpoint, study Renaissance counterpoint, study Baroque, and further on. And again, as I wrote this book on harmony, I wrote this book on counterpoint as well, which is now also with Curci, actually, because they bought Berben. It was published with Berben, but now Curci bought Berben, so both of these books will be with them. And my study of counterpoint was essentially Renaissance Palestrina counterpoint. And I actually planned to do a whole book on Baroque counterpoint, and I just ran out of energy. I just wrote this. It was just writing this. You know, the Renaissance counterpoint was a huge amount of work, and you know, you have to go through the study of the species, different species. Then you go to the study of imitations, the modes. There's so much stuff to do. I also have great affinity for Renaissance music, of course.
Yeah. It links also very nicely to another thing he noticed reading. I'm here, will know. Yeah, that is that it's true that watching your repertoire and also reading how you talk about it, that the nature of your music is seems to be a melting pot of that Renaissance counterpoint, polyrhythmic textures from Balkan music, but also African music, as you mentioned.
Right.
Then jazz idioms. And so we were actually, I mean, it's a fascinating mix. Let's say it's quite a unique mix, as Luca pointed out also earlier. And that's often a nice thing in music, then, to see how many similarities there are, or at least how many similar aspects there are. And we were wondering that very probably, again, the improvisation comes back into the game. In that, is that something you might maybe want to elaborate on as well? So there's these three extremely different geographical points, but also in time and evolutions. Maybe it's interesting to hear even how you got in touch with those and then brought them together in your mind.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, improvisation has been something I've always been interested in, and when I was a teenager, I improvised a lot. And perhaps, when I think about it, perhaps one of the reasons is that I played a lot of music together with my father. As I said, he played violin. He also played. He wasn't a musician. He was professor of physics. He taught physics, so he wasn't a musician. But as a musician, as an amateur musician, he played violin, guitar, and mandolin. So I played with him when I was a kid. I played with him like two guitar duos. I also learned how to play mandolin. So sometimes we would play like Leopold Mozart duos, and things like that. And at the same time, when the Beatles came in, he bought me like the Beatles records. So we played Beatles tunes. And then we played like jazz standards. And so actually my background, I guess, was kind of naturally encompassing all these areas. And then when I was a teenager, I was sort of like divided somewhat between the classical music, playing bossa nova, and then playing in an electric guitar band. So, so it's actually, it's not something unnatural for me. I had this was my background really in all this. And of course, a lot of this stuff I improvised a lot. And this electric guitar band, we primarily played R&B, really liked a lot Aretha Franklin, Sam and Dave in those days, and James Brown, of course. So anyway, I improvised quite a lot of that. And then later on, after I finished my studies in Geneva, when I went to the United States, that was in 1980, I went to Los Angeles. I lived there. I joined a lot of jazz musicians, and for a while, I actually abandoned classical guitar. I just didn't even think I would play classical music again. So it took me it took me like maybe 4 or 5 years. And I just played a lot with really some excellent jazz musicians. Milcho Leviev, this great friend of mine, a Bulgarian composer, pianist, James Newton, flutist, Charlie Hayden, who has died meanwhile, but this great, bass player. So anyway, I played quite a lot. I played in jazz clubs, some standards, but more going in the direction of sort of like a fusion of ethnic music and jazz, some classical. That's where I had this idea of writing jazz sonata, because I came from the background of the classical background, but at the same time improvise. So also played a little bit with some Indian musicians, but not that much. In any case, it was a very interesting period of my life, very open. And then little by little, I came back into the classical environment, and I tried to somehow put it all together. I tried to integrate everything. So that's really why, at this point, and for quite a long time, why I have these influences all integrated together. But I wanted to mention something. I don't know if this is a good advice, but I would say that the most important thing is just to really follow your kind of intuition and follow your directions. Whatever you feel, is it really that where your passion and where your main interest lies? That's really the key to everything. Are you going to kind of get interested in music of pygmies or not? That's kind of besides the point. If you are, then that's even better, of course. So I would say that all these interests that I had, I mean, they didn't come out of my, how shall I say, I wasn't trying to manufacture something. I wasn't trying to manufacture a career. I wasn't trying to come up with a persona of some sort. That's just who I am. That's really, these are my interests, you know, this, and as a person, this is what kind of person I am. So I would just say, just follow your direction. I think that's kind of the most important thing. And just to kind of follow, you know, like particularly interesting things, yeah, that's very nice, sure, if you have some kind of interest in that. But I think it's much more important to follow your passion and your real, your authentic interest. So that would be some kind of advice. Anyway, that's what I did. So
yeah. And so then you have been in America, you have been playing with jazz musicians, with Indian musicians, you have taken jazz, the Beatles, and then Antigone Goni comes. She brings into your life.
Sure.
These Hymn to the Muse that Luca and I have had the pleasure of living from very close in a way, when Antigone was studying it, when she performed it, both in the solo guitar version and meanwhile also in a arrangement that you did yourself for guitar, alto, and cello.
I wrote the arrangement. Yeah, I wrote the arrangement. Yeah.
And that is again a completely different story, because there you have worked with material of over 2,000 years old, and again we were very curious.
Yes.
Right.
Know how you would front something like that, because that goes way beyond Renaissance polyphony. I mean, that is into the mystery of lost music.
Right. It's true. Well, you know, this is something that I really like doing. I mean, what I really like doing, I like composing. I mean, I like putting things together. It just makes me happy to put things together. And I have a kind of very curious and open personality in that way. So I have to admit that before this piece, I never studied much antique Greek music. No, I knew some of the sort of like Greek folk music, say Theodorakis. I knew Maria Faranturi, and like more like popular songs and ethnic Greek music. But then once I started doing this piece, I spent quite long time, actually. I would say maybe 4 or 5 months. I was actually studying antique Greek music, because I didn't want to do just something kind of disconnected. You know, now you're doing antique Greek music, so just some arbitrary sort of. So I wanted to really know about the subject. And so, as I said before, I mean, I get very involved sometimes in a certain subject. I go in a lot of depth and detail. So I got these books. I got a book by West, that's I think is a British writer, about the antique Greek music. And then I connected with a person that teaches antique Greek music in Vienna, at the Academy in Vienna. And so I got various literature on antique Greek music. I learned about the modes of the Greek music, about the system of trichords. There are like trichords. A lot of music is based on trichords. About like modulations. There's also modulation, about different kinds of types of trichords and tetrachords. Microtonality, which I didn't use. I mean, I kind of wish I would have used it, but okay, I didn't use that. And then I started studying the literature. I was thinking, what do I do now? So I just started looking at the fragments, because they're only fragments. There's nothing really apart from the fragments. And so I found Mesomedes, Hymn to the Muse. I found some other music that's pretty well known, like say Seikilos, Epitaph to Seikilos. That's supposedly, I presume that's true. They say this is the first written music document. And then Limenios was a writer of the Delphic hymns of Apollo. So I studied these things, I looked through them, and I found what could speak to me. that's coming always to the same thing. It's like what makes you feel passionate? What makes you feel interested? So I found this music very beautiful, very interesting, and like I said before, I studied also like the technique on how the ancient Greek music is built, and so I took every piece and I kind of deconstructed it. So I tried to understand every piece exactly how it's built, on which modes, etc. And so I kind of, in a way, how shall I say, I was kind of like an archaeologist. I was an archaeologist, but who took the old material and kind of tried to revive it. It was sort of like I don't know, sort of like these movies about the dinosaurs that were reconstructed by having just like little cells, little fossils. So that was kind of in a way similar. I had these little fossils of these fragments of the Greek music, and I tried to reconstruct some contemporary kind of dinosaurs out of it. Of course, I mean, this is contemporary ancient Greek music. I mean, it could not be anything else. Meanwhile, I listened to some interpretations of this music, and it's really kind of tricky. It's very tricky. I listened to some of the pieces, and for example, I found that some of the metric interpretations were different. And that was some of the problem of interpreting asymmetric meter in old music. And in the beginning, music that was, say, rhythmically in 5/8, it would be interpreted as in 6/8 or 3/4, because that was more comfortable to the Western ears. However, it's been some time already that this meter has been understood. But anyway, that's how I approached this. And then also there was a question of the guitar. What do you do with the guitar in this case? And I did think that maybe old instruments like lira and kitara were maybe some kind of some model, because they're very much related to our instrument. They're very much related to guitar. And so in this case, I did use more arpeggios than usual. In any case, the form and the language out of these pieces comes really out of the fragments themselves. I mean, I just kind of let it develop on its own. That's basically what I did. I would deconstruct the music so I understand how it's built, and then I would just let it develop in whatever way it wanted to be developed. And maybe that's something that I would say that's really typical for what I do. I just let it be what it wants to be. I would say that's perhaps. And then, it just winds up being what it wants to be. I try not to interfere, but I'm more like a helper, I feel. And the music develops on its own, the lines go certain ways, and I try not to interrupt the flow, I would say. And then, when you need, of course, you come up with problems every now and then. When there is a problem, then you come there and you just kind of help, solve the problem. Antigone played so beautifully this music. I'm just so happy with what she did. I mean, her recording of this, and also I wrote this arrangement for violin, guitar, and cello, and another one for flute instead of violin. I always make these lots of different arrangements. And anyway, I love this arrangement. I think what Antigone did with her trio, I think is just fantastic. In a way, even a little bit better than solo guitar, because you can hear the lines separately. And it's always hard with the guitar. Not to complain again, but it's hard to hear all the lines when there are like several lines going on. So when you have separate instruments, I think it's all very transparent. In any case, I'm very happy with this music. I'm very happy with the recordings, and I'm up for more antique Greek music. If it comes my way. How's that?
Let's hope it does. Huh?
Great.
I mean, I don't know if this explained a bit.
Absolutely, yeah, I think so. Yeah. It's also very interesting to hear how you indeed took the time to study just for the writing of one piece and did an analysis to actually come to, a composition. And the letting it flow is something I think is really feelable also in the end result, that when we heard it for the first time, we absolutely had no clue what to expect. I only knew for myself the Psychelos tune.
Right.
So,
right.
And actually it's a very magical experience to just sail along on that flow. So it's something that I think is also an experience, of part of the experience of the listener in the end. So
well, I'm happy to hear that. Sure, it's great.
Absolutely wonderful.
Mm-hmm. More?
I think that since so we can also kind of little bit change topic. Let's say you were talking about also the interesting thing of arranging, no? Like you say this, even your own composition, into the muse, but then arranged on different ensembles can give a bigger, let's say, or a better view on really how the line evolves and how the interaction between the voices happen. So would you consider kind of, I'm talking always by the point of view of someone who doesn't have a lot of experience and a lot of developed hands in doing that, but would you say that arranging music can also be a kind of a training for composition, or better for, especially for counterpoint, as you were figuring out, telling before? And was it kind of a preliminary step towards composition when you were younger, as you said, together with improvisation?
Well, arranging it's a great thing to do. Of course, I mean it's a very interesting to do. I studied orchestration when I studied composition. I also studied orchestration, and I studied. We did say orchestration of Debussy preludes. Make it for symphonic orchestra from the piano. We studied a lot the orchestration of Ravel, of the original piano piece by Mussorgsky, the pictures at that exhibition. And I can't say that for me, orchestration was a way towards composition. I think for me, orchestration was more kind of stretching my composition in different areas, in different colors, different how to really understand composition as being able to kind of divide the voices and kind of stretch them across different areas. So it's kind of like intellectual gymnastics to some extent. And it's also kind of emotionally, it's very interesting because you're changing instrumentation. You have very different character of the instruments. I think arranging is, I've arranged a lot of things, especially in my music, I've arranged tremendous amount of stuff. I like arranging just in itself. I think it's a very satisfying thing. And also it kind of clears up your thinking a lot. Because you have to consider that what you're writing is not just an amalgamation of various voices and harmonies and whatnot. You have to clarify everything. You clarify your counterpoint. What is your bass line? What is your middle line? What is the harmony? What is this? What is that? And so that kind of really, I think it could be, I'm not saying it is, but it could be a great way also towards composition and kind of making the composition transparent. I think it's a great thing to do, certainly. I've been very practical in my arranging, meaning I haven't written too much music for the ensembles that I don't have at disposal. So, like, if I had lots of symphonic orchestras that wanted to play my music, I would have written more symphonic music, but I haven't had. So I kind of I stuck with guitar, with chamber music involving guitar, with a lot of voice with different chamber groups, because also I really like writing for voice. Piano music, I've written a fair amount of piano music. So primarily I focused on chamber music. Or chamber music, a few different concertos that I've written, they involve like symphonic orchestras and stuff, but not that much really. So I think orchestration, instrumentation, arranging, it's a great thing to do. I think it's all important to stay in the domain of the practical. That's in my opinion. I think it's very important. And I think that maybe being a composer performer is another very practical thing, because you have your instrument. In the worst case scenario, if nobody else wants to play your music, you can play your music. I mean, I know it seems kind of like pathetic, but actually it's very practical. It's very practical. And I mean, you think about, you know, these great composer performers like Chopin, you know, he could play his own music. You know, I'm sure he played some other stuff apart from his music, but I think, you know, it keeps you grounded. It keeps you grounded, keeps your music alive. It keeps your music accessible to the public, to the audience. And I think if anything else I can say about the problems of 20th century music is that it got very much disconnected. There's a big disconnect between the composition and the audience. And I think that I hope now we are in a period where this connection is becoming real again, and where the audience can really enjoy contemporary composition, where they can understand, you know, what's going on, if not understand everything, where they can emotionally be engaged, you know. And that's been, I think, big problem, is that not only was there an intellectual disconnect, but also an emotional and physical disconnect. And so I think that's, in my opinion, that's very important. And I think music has to be alive, it has to be living, and it's meant for people. I mean, seems kind of obvious, but it's not that obvious.
Indeed. I think that there is some of the state, I mean, like now you touched, some of your statements are contained in some of the books that you published in, I don't know, I remember the one fresher for me, it's the Ex Ovo, which I read like a couple of months ago. So it's really gets connected to what you just said. And actually I wanted to ask you if you would like to mention, to go deep, because I think we're kind of closing the interview.
Sure, okay.
If you wanted to mention some of your works, including Principle of Your Aesthetic or the article that you wrote, like for Soundboard or other kind of magazines, in which more than the actual music, we can also see what's the process behind in terms of building up your own being a musician. Because even I think the aspect of this connection between music and music considered as a market object, and so this division with the public and the return to a more direct connection between the performer and the listener, it's something very concrete in that we are debating a lot in the last couple of years, I think.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of it's a difficult subject, but yeah, it is a difficult subject. But as a personal experience, I can talk perhaps the best about the personal experience. Yeah, I think that for me, being musician was never really a label, meaning I'm a musician, or I don't know, I'm a master, or I'm a student either, you know. So actually, I never thought I was a student. I mean, I'm student always. I was student when I was learning about ancient Greek music. I was a student. But when I was a student, I didn't consider myself student. I was just this person interested in music, feeling passionate about it, playing guitar 10 hours a day, learning about Haydn quartets, being interested in all this. What I mean is there was no disconnect between me as a human being, me as a musician. You know, it's just something, I would say it's something that you are. being a musician for actually, I think most musicians are very, very much defined by being musicians. Maybe not everybody. There are people that are not very much defined. Some people want to just do their lessons. They go like twice, 2-3 times a week. They do their lessons and then they just kind of go on vacation. But I think that, nevertheless, we are kind of defined by music a lot. And so I would say that has been a great challenge for me. It's like, how do I combine all this? And I had a very developed career when I was younger. I had this big competitions that I won when I was in my early 20s, actually. I was 21, 22. And at some point, I just really didn't feel that a career was something that interested me anymore. I just noticed that I was always repeating the same things. I was beginning to kind of not be so interested. You're just going from one hotel to another. I was losing a bit the sense. What was the sense of all this? And so then I quit. I actually quit. And so that was in the moment when my career was very, very developed primarily as a guitarist. And then I came to this other ideas, why don't I try improvising a bit more? So I tried improvising more, came back to jazz, African music. And so then since that time, everything else has been an integration, like a puzzle. Like, how do I put all this together? And that's what I tried to do. And I tried to give enough space, but also enough structure in my life in general, so that I can be alive and I can feel passionate about things. Because, as you know, it's very hard to stay passionate for years and years about, some subject. I think it's just not easy to do, And I think it's important to kind of create certain space for yourself. And I thought that one of the means of doing that was having fair amount of openness in what I do. So not just one thing or another. That's why the improvisation I felt was very important. Composition was important. Teaching also, I thought teaching was very important. The business was somewhat important, but I have to admit that I slacked a bit in the business aspect. And probably if I did more business, I probably would have had a more successful career altogether. But then I'm not sure that I would necessarily like what I do. So that was my question with that. It's kind of like, yes, as long, because we all have to do some amount of business. I mean, it's impossible not to do it. So I think as long as the business is not suffocating your creativity, I think it's okay. If your business is beginning to suffocate your creativity, you're becoming like a puppet of your own business. And I think there's a lot of people, I don't want to name anybody, but there are lots of people, they're kind of like a caricature of their own sort of attempt to be super successful and whatnot. And I think that that's a big problem, in my opinion. For me, that was a big problem. Maybe it's not a big problem for everybody, but I think it's kind of important to know what you want to do today. It's important to know what you want to do today, and not to lose the sight of your passion, really, of what you want to do with music. I think it's very important not to lose that, because otherwise it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like a lost cause. And I think I tried to write about some of these things in this ex ovo in my book. There are some kind of very interesting books on this subject. There is Theodor Adorno, who's written a lot about sociology of music, about philosophy of music. There also there's Jacques Attali, who actually, kind of interestingly enough, he was president of the World Bank, but he's written a great book on economy of music. It's called Bruit, the noise. It's called Noise. Very, very extremely interesting. So it gives like a whole other perspective on the development of the economy of music. So that's, that's of course a whole other subject. But I think if I would cut this a bit shorter, I would say that it's really important to balance. Again, balance and integration, I think, is the key to everything. And there is this problem of sort of kind of putting the economy in front of everything else. Is just, that seems to be a big problem, in my opinion. So how to integrate these things, how to balance it. There's no key to this. I think everybody does it how they want. Somebody wants a big house. Somebody wants a Mercedes. Somebody doesn't care. Somebody wants to sit at home and play their, I don't know, their Nino Rota, or an old Beatles song, or somebody wants to do great concerts in Carnegie Hall. We all want to do different things, so I think we just find our own balance. But as I mentioned, for me personally, it's been a challenge. It's been a challenge, and that's just how it is. So good luck.
Yeah, thanks.
Good luck. That's all I can say. I'm happy that we talked about this, and we'll just hope that we get rid of the virus, and that soon enough we'll go back to Volterra and eat Michele's great pasta.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Okay. Okay. See you.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.